I see we are running a little late, so let me get into this session right away. I don't think Rajat needs an introduction, so I'm not going to do an introduction. I'll just mention that Rajat is an IIT Delhi graduate. He studied at Modern School before that, and he's had a long career in McKinsey after he graduated from the Harvard Business School. Many of you know him, know of him, and know of all his achievements. I think all of you, at least from India, are familiar with the amazing work that he has done in setting up the Indian School of Business and the Public Health Foundation of India. And in fact, he has been associated with lots of other NGOs, if I use that term, social enterprises. And the first question actually I would ask from him is to give us some idea of some of the other NGOs, social enterprises that he has been associated with, and to talk a little bit about the Indian School of Business and Public Health Foundation of India and how they were set up. Rajat.
Thank you, Arjun. I have a bad voice today, so pardon me for that. But I have to first start by saying that Arjun has been a supporter in most of the philanthropic ventures I've undertaken. So that's thank you very much, Arjun, for that support. But let me start by just saying that, it starts from the point of view that business should be a force for good. And business operates with the permission of society. So in that sense, it has a great obligation to give back to society and to make an impact, not only in the businesses that they are in, but actually at society at large. So given that background, I always thought, how do we combine business with society, with government, and bring about change in areas that are big societal problems and difficult to solve. And when I was at McKinsey, I always thought about, okay, here's all these skills that we have, advise companies, etc. What are the things that I've learned that will allow me to make a difference in starting a not-for-profit enterprise that will make a true impact? The first thing I asked myself, what do I know about, what do I really know? And that's how ISB came about, because McKinsey was the largest employer in almost all business schools. So I knew something about business schools. I sat on the board of Harvard, Kellogg, MIT, and a number of other business schools. So I said, let me try to start a world-class business school in India. And that was the basis of it. I said also that the business leaders who would be the beneficiaries have an obligation to support this effort, and which to put together a collaborative effort to get the business leaders from India as well as from around the world to start the school. Everybody said it couldn't really be done. A private enterprise, not IIMs or IITs, etc., supported by the government. And, around 20 years later, it now graduates about 1,100 MBAs a year. It's the largest business school in the country. By many counts, it's the best business school. It has now more than 12,000 alumni. And in fact, it's one of the institutions in India, very few, that are rated in the top 25 in the world. So if you really believe something, you can get it done. I would also say one that Arjun and his wife Kiran have both been involved in is another area that I've always felt passionate about. And it was a very simple story. What happened was that I used to be on the board of the Harvard School of Public Health. And one year I was returning from the graduation ceremonies at ISB. And I went to the board meeting and I told the dean, we were having breakfast together before the board meeting. I said, I'm just coming back from India, and told him about ISB and how fantastic it is and all that. And he said to me, well, starting a business school and building a business, that must be very easy. If you really want to make a difference to the country, you should start some schools of public health. Because the state of the health of the country was not very good. It's still not very good. And in a poor country like India, you can't really expect to have people get sick and then fix them. That's too expensive a route. We have no shortage of fantastic surgeons and fantastic clinicians, but that's not the state of the health of the country. What you really need to do is to make sure that you invest in preventive and promotive health, and that's what the Public Health Foundation is about. I'll just end this question with one simple thing, which is that you got to think about what are the skills that you've developed as an engineer, as a research scientist, as a businessman, as an executive, and apply those skills to give back to societal problems. A very simple example was I used to be the chairman of the Global Fund for AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Malaria used to kill 1 million kids a year. And the solutions were very well known. You had to have insecticide-impregnated bed nets, and you had to have ACTs, which was a modern medicines, to be able to cure malaria. While the solutions were very well known, actually it was a business problem. The business problem was, how do you get 200 million bed nets distributed throughout Africa? It's a logistics challenge. How do you get the medicines to the last mile? And what we were able to bring was not just science, but basically management thinking, planning, and logistics, all of the things that all of you are familiar with to solve that problem. And today, the malaria deaths have gone down to 400,000 a year. It's an extraordinary achievement and saved more lives than almost anything I can imagine right now.
Thank you, Rajat. And now that John is not in the room, I can say that, hey, I don't think writing a book has to do with egos, because if that was true, then we wouldn't have read philosophers, and I probably wouldn't be an electronics engineer because Perron wouldn't have written the radio engineering handbook. That was kind of a Bible in those days when I graduated. Now, Rajat has written a book, and I'd sort of encourage all of you to have a look at it and read it, Mind Without Fear. I think most importantly for me when I read it was, to me, it explained the person, your value system, how you look at life, how you look at other people, how you deal with other people. But one of the other things that struck me very strongly, and I think he has had first-hand experience, is the whole criminal justice system in this country. And I won't give my view, but I'll ask Rajat, because he's had first-hand experience, to tell you what he thinks of it and what he's planning, what he's doing now to try and see how we can improve it so that it's more effective.
Let me start by saying why I wrote the book. Most of you know that I have been through many difficult challenges in the last several years. 2 years ago, I came here and spoke a little bit about it. I've had many ups and downs in my life, and the last several years was a very challenging time. I decided to write a book not because of anything like defending myself or relitigating the case and so on, but it was more to do with, I said I've had an interesting life full of ups and downs. A lot of lessons. It's not a straight line journey. Lots of lessons learned in between. And it is also a story I thought that many of you, especially in this audience, can relate to. So I wanted to write a story which was an interesting story, but all of you could see yourself in it. And I wanted to write it in a very conversational tone. So if you read my book, you'll see it's like like we are talking. And doesn't have, here are 5 lessons and here are 3 lessons from this. It is more something that you need to take out of it yourself, and different people will take different lessons out of it. Anyway, that much about the book. But on the criminal justice system, I would say that all of you are very familiar with, and I say this in the book, of what went on in the time period when there was a huge financial crisis. We had a financial crisis which, almost put our financial system completely at risk. But most importantly, it impacted the mainstream, the common man on the street dramatically. People were losing their jobs, people were losing their pensions, people were losing their homes, and there was a tremendous amount of anger in society at that point in time. Now, what happened is that while it was the right thing to do to save the financial system, and we bailed the financial system out, what we didn't necessarily do is to hold people truly accountable for who created this financial crisis. We find the institutions, almost every financial institution that you can think of, paid very large fines. They admitted wrongdoings. However, institutions don't do wrong. People within them do wrong. None of the people, none of the executives were held truly accountable for it. So it was in that atmosphere that my case was brought about, and I go about it, describing it in my book, but basically I believe that it was a function of the times, and I believe that it was a result of a very over-aggressive prosecutor, as well as the atmosphere where somebody needed to be held accountable. And there were a number of people held accountable, but none of them really had much to do with creating the financial crisis. But when I went to prison, I interviewed many of my fellow prisoners. And my conclusion is that there is a lot of things that are wrong with the criminal justice system in this country. We have over 2 million incarcerated people. There are 70 or 80 million people who have been directly affected because their family members have gone to prison, et cetera, et cetera. There is nothing that gets done in terms of trying to get these people back into the mainstream of society. Recidivism rates are 60 to 70%. So there is much that is wrong with the system, including overzealous prosecutors, including systems like the plea bargaining system that leads to not the search of truth, but just about winning. Prosecutors are much about winning, not about searching of truth. I was in prison talking to a number of people who said that, it was a minor, let's say a drug crime, selling marijuana on the street corner. And the prosecutors would come to them and say, well, you'll get 20 years, but I'll reduce the sentence to 5 if you can name 3 of your conspirators. Now, this person told me, I didn't have any conspirators. But this was a devil's bargain. Either I face 20 years or I may name 3 people. And I named 3 people. They were innocent. They got the same cycle, same deal. I can go on and on about examples of what the criminal system, justice system does and what is fundamentally wrong with it. If many of you don't know probably about this, it's called Marshall Project. Marshall Project was started by a retiring editor of New York Times. It's published daily. It's a journalistic effort to just bring spotlight to the criminal justice system. Anybody can sign on to it. It's free. If you read it, you'll get a feel for what is going on in the criminal justice system and how much reform it needs.
Thanks, Rajat. The other thing I thought that would be useful for all of you, and I've read the book, is that for a minor offense, like having an extra pillow because he had a bad back when he was in that facility, Rajat was given 7 weeks of solitary. And I really would like him to share that experience with all of you, not just getting the solitary, but how he went through it. Because when I read the book, I thought if it had happened to me or it happened to any of us, especially I thought of myself, that what would I have done to stay sane through that particular period? And so I just thought it would be interesting for him to share that with you. And hopefully none of you are in that situation ever, but if you do get into a situation where you are by yourself for a while, that might be a very useful way to keep yourself sane, engaged, whatever term you want to use. So.
Let me start by saying that, as most of you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you're in prison, they have absolute power over you. While they say that there are all these systems and you can appeal and all that, really it doesn't function. You are at the mercy of the prison guards. They put me into solitary confinement for what I would say very minor infractions, if any. Now, just to describe to you what a solitary confinement cell is, that cell is the size of from there to there and where we are sitting, okay? It is all made out of steel. There is a bunk bed. There is a toilet and a wash basin. No toilet seat. It's all stainless steel. There's a big door that is all steel. There's a tiny window that is maybe 4 inches wide and about 3 feet long. You can barely get light enough to read. Daylight doesn't come in. In the door, they have a slot, which is locked normally, and they feed you your food tray through that slot. And if you're not fast enough, the food will fall on the floor and you'll have to pick it up and eat from there. The mattress is like, once probably was 2 inches, but it's actually 2 plastic sheets. You don't have any control per se over anything. You don't get any daylight, but you have these neon lights, and the switch is outside. So they at will put on the switch or put off the switch, doesn't matter. And so you go through nights where you're blaring neon lights on your head, and you go through days where there is no light even to read. By law, you get 1 hour of what they call recreation, which really means you can go outside. They handcuff you, take you out in what I would only describe as a cage that you would see in a zoo. It's probably the size of this stage. It's got chain link fence all around it and barbed wire on top. So you're looking at this cage where you can go up and down and walk, and that's basically your recreation. So that's kind of the environment in which you are there, and there is no one to talk to. I was lucky enough to say that, I carried 2 books with me. One was the Bhagavad Gita, and they were going to take it away from me, but I said, no, this is my Bible, you have to let me keep it. And after a fight, they did. And the other one was a book on pranayam that I had with me, which I also described as a religious book, but it wasn't. And, I'd read the Gita before in my life, but this was the first time I read it cover to cover about 5-6 times. And one of the things that I write in my book there's a chapter, Arjun would say, it's called the Gita and solitary confinement. And how reading the Gita was very inspiring to me and helped me cope. There were 2 things that helped me. One was my father was a freedom fighter and was in jails for about 10 years. And when he was quite sick in his early 50s, and I was a teenager, and he used to tell me stories about it. And that gave me a lot of strength in terms of, okay, I can be. He said, you cannot always control what happens to you, but you can control how you react. But some of the things that came out of the Gita and the philosophy that we all share, it's not just about a religion, was very, very helpful. I mean, the notion that, we are the immortality of the soul. Chapter 2 is all about immortality of the soul. It was fascinating to read about it and say, doesn't matter where you are, you will always live on. And whether you are in a solitary confinement in this cell, or whether you're out there enjoying it's all the same. It's a very fascinating thought. The idea then to say that there is a message in Gita which says that you ought to get detached, action with detachment. And so you do what you have to do, but be very detached and be like a observer yourself. So it was kind of fascinating to me, as if I was not going through solitary confinement, but I was just observing myself going through solitary confinement. There's a message in the Gita that says, you ought to take, all this is kind of in a sense a mirage. You should be able to take the highs and lows, the joys and sorrows, the successes and failures, all in the same way, and you should be able to stay with equanimity. And those kinds of messages really helped me cope with the solitary confinement. I felt I came away from it. I would not wish it on anybody, but it was an extraordinary experience. It's like going through Vipassana for 7 weeks. I also, the guy who put me in there, I took a tiny bit of revenge, which was interesting, which is that, when you're in prison, you can do one thing that they cannot deny you, which you can always have a call with your lawyer. And I asked my lawyer to schedule a call every 2 days, and that he would have to come, handcuff me, take me to a conference room, and stand outside the conference room, looking at me. He couldn't hear what I have to say, but he has to stand outside. I did that every 2 or 3 days for all that time period. And I would make the call for 2 hours, and the guy would have to stand outside. At the end of this time period, he says, I don't understand. You never asked me when you're leaving or when you're getting out of this. I said, why should I? It's prison with room service. I'm fine with it. Next week, I got out.
Well, thank you, Rajat. I mean, I just wanted him to share that firsthand with all of you. Of course, Rajat has been he was the first chairperson of the Global Pan-IIT Alumni Association, and a lot of what the Pan-IIT concept is today is really thanks to him. Not just Pan-IIT, he was also instrumental in TIE. Some of you I know are involved with TIE. I was and I am. And so in a lot of ways, he has really been a key part of this whole IIT movement and a key part as an IITian for all of us. I know we're running out of time. I was going to check if there are any questions. We'll take a couple of them. I'm keeping everyone away from their wine and cocktails. So it'd be nice if there are no questions, but if there are questions, we'd take a few.
Not a question, but Okay, this is not a question, but I had the honor of leading the Pan-IIT starting team. And I can tell you one thing, without Rajat's help, we wouldn't be what we were today. That's for sure. Give him a big hand.
Let me just say that Monishi and Arjun were both very instrumental, but I was delighted to see in the first conference we had the chairman of Microsoft here, which was Bill Gates, and now we had the chairman of Microsoft again on this conference. That was wonderful. My personal aspiration would be that this institution and IITs that we all belong to goes from strength to strength in this environment, that this conference which is an annual event, grows to become more and more impactful, that we in the leadership actually strive to serve our alumni base and provide as many wonderful services that we can to strengthen our institutions that we owe a great deal to, and to help each other to succeed even more in this country. So I very much look forward to this conference, Pan IIT as a movement, as an institution, grow from strength to strength and actually deliver what our promise is. Thank you very much.
Hey, my name is Ansh. I'm from a startup here in Zero UI. I think I have a question regarding, since you're one of the VCs and you're a management genius, with startups here, we put in so much hard work and effort into bringing out a product which is $200, $300 in the US market. And what really bites us back is like when we try to introduce that product into the Indian market, it's so expensive. So I was wondering if you feel that there are some, what are your advice to say some of the startup people out here, how can they introduce a $200, $300 product into the Indian market, or are there some social ventures or social channels where it may be something which can be helpful? Yeah.
This is right up your alley, Arjun.
Yeah. So, this has been from time immemorial. When the US first started exporting software products to India, the standard thing was a markup of 15 to 35% compared to the US price. And they were just not successful selling to India. So AutoCAD, if I remember, Autodesk with their AutoCAD product, was the first product that decided to price the same product in India for the Indian market. And actually, from a time when there were just 5 official copies of AutoCAD in India, we ended up being nearly 95% official sales rather than people copying it. And it made copying so much not lucrative that people preferred to have the actual support and stuff that they had. So when you're dealing with markets like India, I would say Africa would come in there. I would say to an extent China would be a part of it. You have to price it according to the ROI that comes for the local market. So, AutoCAD is a good example because I remember it was in my time. They said that they would replace a draftsman in 6 months. Now, when you price a product that high in India, it was 3 years or 4 years before you replaced a draftsman. So if your concept is the same, try and look at that market and see how you can replace that draftsman, if that was your idea of selling it, in that period of time. Maybe you can stretch 6 months to 9 months or even a year, but the concept has to exist. And that's really what happens. So if you're looking at pricing products in India, try and look at what's relevant to that market, what people will be willing to pay, and how they calculate the ROI compared to what the ROI is here, how you calculate it in that market. And that will give you an idea of where you should price it. Okay, thank you. Okay, one last question, and then we better go for our cocktails.
Hi, Rajat sir. Thank you for the candid conversation. My question was with regards to the advice that you gave or what you learned about from Bhagavad Gita, being equanimous in the vicissitudes of life or being detached. Well, traditional materialistic advice is, be passionate, live life to your fullest, go achieve your dreams. So how do you reconcile the two? And so I was wondering if you can give some perspective about that.
I think, the philosophy of Karma Yoga, which many of us understand and know and follow, has nothing to do with not being passionate. It actually is quite the opposite, which is that you have to do the right things and do it with the right intentions. And you have to do it the very best of your ability. So with full passion, and leave the results to God. Or don't worry about the results. Which is actually a very liberating philosophy. It says basically, I'm going to live my life to the fullest. I'm going to do what I want to do, what I think is right. I'm going to do it the best way I can. And then whatever the results will be, will be. And I find that a very liberating philosophy. And I also think that's basically says, as I said, action with detachment. Action is your duty, and no question about that. It's not a lazy philosophy. It's not a fatalistic philosophy. It's actually a philosophy which says that you your duty is to do the best you can. Your duty is to follow your passion. Your duty is to do the right things.
Thank you, Rajat. That's all yours, not at all. Thank you. Oh, so now you're holding us up.
Oh, just a couple of minutes. Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute actually to thank everybody for being here. I also wanted to take a moment to thank all the volunteers without whom a conference of this size could not happen at all. So if you don't mind waiting for a couple of minutes, and so you can at least thank all our volunteers, I'd like to begin by actually welcoming and thanking our MC, wonderful MC, Surbi Kaul. I'd also like to invite Bimal, who is he's also been driving, one of the driving forces behind the Startup Mela. We had a very large attendance of startups. So Bimal, please come on stage. Indra Singhal, who is our CFO. Indra, please come on stage. Gaurav, who is our sponsorship chair. Gaurav Agarwal. Kundan Krishna, who has basically been driving the logistics, everything related to the registration, the rooms, the food, the excellent food, and the wonderful chai that you had is all because of Kundan. So Kundan. Padma, who could not be here today. But then there are a lot more people who have been involved. So I'd like to start with Prashant. Please come up. Prashant, Ravi, Saroj, Prasad, and Ashish, who are part of the Startup Mela. As part of the content team, we have Tushar Kant, we have Amina, we have Rao, Amit Gupta, Ishita, Tyaga, I think Tyaga had to leave, Neha, Nidhi, Sushruta, and Kapil. Please come up on stage. And as part of the registration and logistics with Kundan, we have Priya, Kushal, Nidhi, Saroj, Neil, Nishant, Dikshant, Shraddha, Prasad, Aditya, and Ashish. Please come up on stage. And as part of the marketing that Surbi has been driving, there's Shraddha, Richa, Nishant, Shikhar, and Neha. And then I also want to say about sponsorship, we have Shiva, who has been helping, and Aman Walia. If you're around, can you please come up on stage? Because you always end up hiding somewhere. So I'd like you to give a big round of applause to the entire team here. We couldn't have done this without everyone's support. So thank you again, all of you who are here, the sponsors, the speakers. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you again. So enjoy your wine and continue to network. I hope you have taken a lot from this. Please have a good time.
See you next year.
See you next year.